Hi, I'm Lance Cottrell, Chief Scientist for Passages. Thanks so much for joining us for this webinar targeting phishing and malvertising, how to protect against the triple threat. So we're going to be talking about particularly the attack methodologies of phishing and malvertising, why they're increasing rapidly, how they work, and in particular why targeting acts as a catalyst to make both of these kinds of attacks much, much worse.
So imagine it's your birthday, and you get an e-card from your mother on your birthday. Would you open it? It's exactly what you're expecting to get from the person you're expecting to get it, assuming your mother's the kind of person who sends e-cards. I think that's exactly the kind of messaging that we all would feel like that's legitimate. That's the kind of thing you're expecting to get. That's the kind of thing you're going to click on. Well, how about news sites? Do you check Forbes, New York Times, CNN, Wall Street Journal in the morning? You know, quick checkup on the news, see what's going on in the world, see what the stock market's doing. Does that worry you? And I think a lot of people are not concerned about websites like that because they're mainstream. They're the kind of site that are well maintained. They're major corporations. This is not the back alleys of the internet. So people feel very comfortable going to those kind of sites. But in reality, that is where the threats are coming from. And we believe that phishing and malvertising will be your biggest outside threats to your endpoints in 2015 and really for the foreseeable future. I mean, we're talking here primarily about endpoint threats, not about attacks against your website or, say SQL injection attacks against web apps that you may be running, but against your endpoints. Those are the big threats. And the interesting thing is both of these are fundamentally focused on your browser. Even phishing, which you think of as primarily an email-based attack, really, in most cases, is exploiting against the browser. So why attack the browser? Why should that be the route that hackers are trying to use to infiltrate businesses and create breaches? And I've talked about this in some previous webinars, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but there's several reasons. The first is that the browser is a gigantically complex piece of code. It's many millions of lines long. It's probably the single largest application that you run on a day-to-day basis after the operating system itself. And the more code there is, the more opportunities there are for bugs or vulnerabilities. It's something that could be exploited by an attacker to sneak in there. These are also very rapidly evolving applications. There's always new changes in the standards, new kinds of content. These browser makers are trying to stay ahead of each other in some sort of features or functions on an ongoing basis. And of course, the more you're evolving the code and introducing new capabilities, the more you are opening yourself up to new bugs and new exploits. Unlike most applications, browsers execute full programs. In fact, most browsers can execute something like 4 different complete operating programming languages just within a web page. So Flash, JavaScript, Java, maybe ActiveX, maybe Silverlight, and now HTML5 is actually a full programming language. HTML4 wasn't, but 5 is. The problem with programming languages is it's technically impossible to know that a given piece of code will never do anything bad. So, you can execute, assuming it's somewhat complicated, you really don't know that it might not, under some circumstances, put the operating system into some set of parameters that will allow them to launch an exploit. And so it's very hard to just examine this code from scratch and say, oh, that's going to be safe. And because browsers are running this kind of content all the time, that makes them very vulnerable. It's also harder to defend them because browsers are user-initiated outgoing content rather than incoming content. So a lot of the security that we've built over the years is built around a model of having firewalls and perimeters that you're enforcing and preventing outsiders from making connections into your servers and attacking them. And that works for a lot of kinds of applications. If you've got a web server, it makes sense to set it up so that nothing except web requests can come in. And frankly, it's your website. You kind of know what those web requests should look like. You know that they should be form submissions. They should only be to certain kinds of URLs. They should only be certain lengths. There's a lot of characteristics that you may know about that traffic. That's not at all true about browsers. You know that the user's browser is going to go make a request against the internet. And it's going to go out and say, please give me the contents at this URL, and maybe pass along some extra data. And then it gets a response back, and that response could be absolutely anything. It could be video, it could be audio, it could be downloaded exe files, it could be, some sort of an AJAX active website. And the firewall really has no idea what to expect coming back from a given request out. So it's very difficult to successfully harden that perimeter against the browsers. I personally like to think of it as kind of the vampire problem, that if it's hard for the vampires to come in unless you invite them into your house. Well, the browser is inviting the stuff in. It's requesting the content. Even if the human didn't intend it, the firewall doesn't know that. All it knows is that the browser on your desktop asks to be given this URL, and it turns out it's full of malware, but it doesn't necessarily know that. And it's hard for it to tell because all this is happening in near real time. It's not like email where if it takes a minute or two to detonate some attachment, that's fine. If I'm looking at a website, I kind of want the whole website to load nowish. If it's 2 seconds, I'm not happy. If it's 10 seconds, I'm really not happy. If it's 5 minutes, that's not web browsing anymore. And so you're kind of reduced then to signature checking. And we know signature checking doesn't work. It's just not an effective way of identifying malware, particularly not advanced malware that the sophisticated attackers are using today to try to get through. After all, they have access to all the same signature engines as well, and they're continuously testing all the tools they use against the big lists of malware providers, anti-malware providers, to check to make sure that their payloads will successfully get through. And so they do. So phishing and malvertising, these are rapidly increasing attack mechanisms. According to the Anti-Phishing Working Group, phishing doubled in 2015, and it's been doing that for a long time. It's really on a tear. We're seeing more and more phishing attacks going on all the time. And malvertising has tripled between 2014 and 2015. Again, a rapidly increasing method of attack that's out there. And I think these are both increasing because the hackers are finding them effective and because many of their other techniques are being cut off, because we're able to do a better job of scanning emails, of blocking spammers, of looking for other kinds of attack mechanisms. So these are known effective techniques, and so the attackers are going to them more and more frequently. But when we combine that with targeting, things get much worse. It's now not just some fish swimming by and hoping to catch you. This is the great white coming right at you. It's because they know who you are, they've designed the email for you, they know what they're trying to get, and much more likely to be effective and much more likely to do damage if it is effective. And similarly with malvertising, this is not just some random ad coming at you, but now they know who they're going after, they probably know the operating system, they're probably able to use their best tools against you, and it's much more probability of success if you're in their target, and more damage when it comes through. So let's take a step back and just make sure we're on the same page as far as our definitions of these things. So by phishing, I'm talking about email messages designed to trick the victim into clicking on a link or opening malicious content. We're specifically not talking here about scams. That's a whole nother set of phishing attacks which are going against the human in the seat. And technological protections against that are incredibly difficult. It's still a major issue, but it's also much more trainable to teach people not to provide information. And we are seeing a big trend moving towards links over attachments because, as I was talking about earlier, they're harder to scan. If I've got an email coming in, I can have my mail gateway stop the email for a minute, take the attachment, run it through an exploder, do all sorts of analyses on it, run it in a virtual environment, and then, okay, if everything looks good, then I can allow it through to the user. Whereas with a link, this actually is a much harder problem. Right? The mail gateway sees that there's an email with a link. I now need to initiate outside connections. That box needs to connect to the internet. It may, in fact, expose itself to some sort of attack in that process. But if the attacker is using targeting techniques, they're going to be smart. Not only have they targeted the email, but they will have targeted the link to be smart about how it behaves. So when the mail security system connects to the link, it gets an ordinary web page. It gets what the link purports to be doing. And so it looks like there's no attack taking place at all. And then when it gets to your real desktop and you connect to the same URL, the website goes, this is a real browser, and boom, the attack is launched and you get compromised. As well, I think people treat the links as less threatening than attachments. We've had so many lessons, so many security experts beating into all of our users that attachments to email are evil. Don't click any attachments. Don't open files on your desktop. Don't run EXEs. Don't touch that Word document. Don't open that PDF. And we've all gotten very, very paranoid about that. Whereas a link seems like, it's just going to launch my browser and I'm going to look at a page. How could that hurt me? I'm not going to download anything. I'm not going to, click on anything bad. It seems like a safe thing to do. And so using links rather than attachments allows the phisher to get a higher response rate and be more effective in their attacks. So malvertising, probably less well known than phishing. This is advertisements on innocent websites that have been hijacked to deliver malware. And we've seen this a lot. We saw it happen to Forbes twice. We've seen it happen to the New York Times, Huffington Post, AOL, lots of international press. And what goes on is that the advertisement is this multi-layered organizational beast. So you've got the website, you're going to Forbes, but Forbes is not serving the ads. They've hired someone else, maybe Google, double-click, to actually put the banner on the page and display that information. But they're often subbing that out to other providers. So someone else may, in fact, be buying up blocks of ad space and then selling it to someone who wants to put the display ads in there. And they are then selling that space to the end advertiser who provides the graphics and the code and the content and the targets for those links. Post an ad or post a real ad and then swap it out for an ad that has an exploit in it. Then when you get to Forbes, if that ad gets shown to you, the exploit in the ad runs and it hacks your browser. Right? And then that allows them to get access to do the downloads, to push the malware onto your computer. And the important thing to understand is this is not primarily happening in the dark alleys. People for years thought, well, avoid the adult websites, avoid the wares, the hacker websites, the pirated movies, because that's where all the malware is. And someone did a study a couple of years ago and found out actually the odds of getting hacked on those websites is less than the odds of getting hacked when you visit a mainstream legitimate website. And it makes sense. The people who are visiting the legitimate websites are the ones of interest. They're the ones with money. They probably have good jobs. They're the ones you want to attack because they've got the stuff you want to steal. So malvertising is actually preferentially located on these large-scale, public, well-known websites. And you don't need to click anything. You don't need to click the ads. As soon as you see it, the exploit launches and it can attack your browser. So then we've got that attack. And there's really two kinds of attacks that they can launch, the drive-by download and the Trojan. So with a drive-by, they're going to actually exploit the browser directly. They're going to find some weakness either in your browser or in one of the plugins, in Flash, which is their favorite. They see most of the exploits against that. But there's lots of plugins. Java's a popular one. but they also are continuously finding them in the actual browsers themselves. And the attacker can actually have multiple exploits that they can launch against you and pick them in real time based on what browser configuration you happen to have when you view the ad. And so in this case, they're hacking the browser. They're using an exploit to allow them to download some form of malware onto your computer, which then pulls down all of the other stuff that they need to do, the ransomware, or the remote access terminal, or whatever it is that the attacker wants to get onto your computer to actually get at the stuff they want. The other approach is they can use Trojan, where they, rather than hacking the browser, they hack the user, and they trick you into intentionally downloading and opening a file. And so this is a little more tricky from the human side, but it means you don't need to burn a browser exploit to do it. You say, here's a PDF with information about, investment advice or whatever it is. You open that, it has an exploit. Or indeed, if they can trick you into installing software, they can get you to run an exe that will just directly attack your computer. Either way, they now have access to and control of your desktop, and you're pretty much toast. And just to give you a sense of how this plays out, we actually see someone did a study of cyberespionage attacks. 30% of them used malicious email links, and 16 of them were drive-by downloads off websites, off watering holes, like Forbes or any other website that you're likely to see your target audience gathering at. All right, so that was the generic attacks. That's standard phishing and malvertising. But what about targeting? Why is it that targeting makes this much worse? How does that amplify the problem and cause more damage? Well, the reality is most companies are targets. There's a study by Quocira of companies in Europe, and they studied 600 companies, and I suspect the data is the same in the United States. Over 60% of the companies they talked to said that they had been specifically targeted by hackers. So we're not talking just someone in the company clicked on a generic phishing link. These were individually targeted against the organization or individuals in the organization. More than half. Over 40%, these attacks were successful. 20% lost data, so they were able to get in and actually get something of value. And in 15%, over 15%, there was significant reputational or financial damage to the company. So these targeting attacks are able to get in, they're very effective, they're becoming very common, and they can do a lot of damage. Just again, to convince you of the reality of this, a bunch of companies were surveyed in 2013, asked, is targeting a concern or is targeting inevitable? In 2013, 28% said yes. In 2015, same question, 70% said it was a concern or inevitable, as opposed to not a problem or somewhat of a problem. This change really shows the degree to which the attackers are adopting these targeting type attacks because they're working so well for them. Final data point in the financial sector, looking at web application attacks this time that involved, what fraction involved end user devices? 82%. So even if they're not trying to attack your desktop, they're actually trying to attack your infrastructure. We're seeing a lot of those attacks starting at the desktop to get access to the resources they need to come at the website from the inside rather than trying to come at it through your firewall from the outside. So let's look at some of the reasons why they want to do this kind of targeting. I think the most important is staying below the radar. That's the biggest win for the attacker when they choose to target. The first thing they want to do is not attack bots or researchers. If I've got a malvertising link, right, I've set up an ad, I've got it onto Forbes, the last thing I want to do is serve that ad to absolutely everyone who sees the website. Because Forbes and pretty much any big legitimate website is probably hiring security companies to run scanners against the website, to look for malvertising, to look for malware, to look for any kind of compromise. And if they see an attack launched against the bot, boom, they're going to start remediating. They're going to fix it. They're going to pull out those problems. Same with researchers. If you see someone coming in from Symantec or from FireEye or some other researcher, you don't want to launch the attack against them because then they're going to start gathering data about it and analyze it and do all sorts of other things. Targeting also keeps the volume low, and that helps with anomaly detection, right? You don't want to be launching huge numbers of attacks, particularly like throughout a company. You wouldn't want to send a phishing email to everyone in the company. Everyone's clicking, or many people are clicking on those links, and you see this big spike to some website you've never seen, or you see a big spike in a certain kind of file type getting pushed down. That leaves a big, bright light on the Security Operations Center control panel. They're going to see, wow, something weird is happening. We should go in and investigate. Whereas when you're narrowly targeting, the load goes way, way down. And some people have done attempted to get at this by just reducing the fraction of people that they attack. But you still have the problem that that's just as likely to be a bot as anyone useful. It doesn't up your success rate at all. Because fewer targets, less chance for detection across the board. So if I only infect the 5 people that I know I wanted to get at, the odds of them having the malware, anti-malware on their desktop that happens to catch it or be clever enough to notice it or to have a sysadmin that notices it sort of scales like the number of people you infect. If I infect 1,000 people, it's really likely I'm going to get caught. If I infect 5, the odds are much, much less. But I only need 1 in the company of interest. I'm not playing a numbers game, right? If I'm just trying to steal credit card numbers off your computer, that's a numbers game. I need millions of successes. But if I'm trying to infiltrate your company, I only need to get 1 or 2 people in the right place to allow me to then, extend horizontally, do privilege escalation, move up, and get to the thing I'm trying to get at. And if I can avoid getting detected, particularly by the security researchers and the bots and the malware companies, and let's face it, if the sysadmin discovers me, it's going to get back to them pretty quick, I can prevent signature creation. I want to make sure that no one can create a simple rule that now suddenly the firewall does recognize my attack. It can do it in real time, and then I get blocked. So the attacker wants to avoid that signature creation at all times because he spent money on this zero-day exploit. Most of the attackers you're seeing didn't write this zero-day themselves. They've gone to the marketplace and acquired some zero-day exploit to run against your company. And a good zero-day exploit is worth, 6 figures, high 6 figures sometimes, depending on the platform. They're very expensive, very valuable. You want to make sure that they stay effective as long as possible. And if you use them to do something like just steal credit card numbers, the payoff is very low. It's going to get caught fast, and suddenly that 0 day is not a 0 day anymore. It's now a 30 day, and everyone has the signature for it, and it has no effect anymore. So best reason why we are seeing the attackers using this targeting really is to stay below the radar. But it also helps with social engineering, and this is my obligatory cute puppy picture. But what they want to do is appear friendly to you. So they want to come from a trusted source. If they're going to send you a link to an e-card, they're going to try to find out who your mother is and send it from your mother, from her real email address. Try to get it so that it feels expected. They're not going to send you a card on some random date. They're going to find out when your birthday is and send it on your birthday. Even the choice of watering hole attacks, right? If you see a pop-up and you're on a Wares site, you're probably worried that, oh my God, that warning, I'm on a bad site, I got to watch out for it. If you see a warning pop up on your browser and you're at Forbes or CNN, I think most people are going to be less concerned, more likely to sort of brush it off, just click OK, let things go. And just from a mental point of view, it sets off fewer warnings or flags when they've done the social engineering. And social engineering really depends on targeting. You see it done really crudely on a large scale. I'll get a spam that says, hey, your Wells Fargo bank account needs you to log in and update your password. Well, that didn't work very well because I don't have a Wells Fargo account, right? I know right off the bat that that's just spam. It's very poorly targeted. Obviously, lots of people are going to report it. It's going to get caught. Whereas if they were targeting me individually, they'd know, where do I bank? They'd know, where I live, what branch I might be coming from, They might even been watching my social media and know I bought a new car, I bought a new house, I'm planning a vacation, and actually adapt the message to very specific information to get it to look more realistic and get me to open it. So I made the argument that a lot of companies are being targeted. Most companies have experienced targeted attacks, but I still hear over and over from people, I don't think I'm a target. And so I'm going to make a case that you are. So who is a target? Well, obvious high-profile individuals are targets. If you're the CIO, the CFO, the CTO, the CISO, you're a target. You know, if you're the senior architect and you're the senior system administrator in the NOC, you're a target, right? Obviously, these are people that are known that someone's going to want to go after. You might have access to valuable data, right? You may be privy to information. It could be the credit card records in the company. You might have all of the employment information, social security numbers, medical data. You know, you may have accounts, passwords, access to the corporate databases. Or maybe you just know business information. You know the financials in the company before they came out. You know your M&A activity. You know what investments the financial firm is looking at making. All of those could be incredibly valuable to an attacker who's going to be able to zoom in and take advantage of that. You may also have access to exploitable data. So this is data that's not necessarily valuable, or at least doesn't appear to be valuable in and of itself, but an attacker can do something interesting with it. My favorite example of this was PR Newswire. And what happened was they were hacked. PR Newswire is a press release service. You can post press releases to them. They blast it out to all sorts of media. Tons of companies use this tool. And I think PR Newswire probably felt like they were never a target, because who'd want to hack a Newswire site? Because the press releases are all going public in a few hours or a few days. Everyone's going to know it. This is for public release. What could be the concern? Well, the hackers knew better. They hacked PR Newswire and would wait for embargoed press releases, and almost all press releases are embargoed for some amount of time. It would say, okay, here's this press release on our quarterly results, or on this merger that we're planning, or this new product, or a recall of our product, and release this tomorrow at noon. Well, they'd get in, they'd see it, make a quick decision about whether this was significantly good news or bad news for the company, and then pass it out to this little army of people they had who do investments based on it. These people would either buy the stock or buy options or short the stock, and they were making a killing in the stock market because they had hours to days advance notice on what was actually going to be announced by the company when the press release came out. They made enormous amounts of money before they were finally caught. You may have access to money. You know, you have the passwords to the bank account, or to, you know, some other financial resource that someone could move around. If you are in the accounting department, that could be a big win. Even if they could go in and tweak the numbers to cause you to issue a refund or change pricing, that could be a win for the attacker. So if you touch money, you're a target. You may be someone who has access to networks, either your own corporate networks, right? Your desktop is on a somewhat unsegregated LAN from your production space, or you may have access to other networks you haven't even thought about. And the classic example of that was really the hack against Target, where the hackers went in and planted malware on the point-of-sale terminals inside Target and stole huge amounts of credit card data and ended up toppling the CEO and, you know, disrupting the board and major C-level problems in that company. The way the hacker got in was they attacked Target's HVAC contractor. And probably that contractor was thinking, what, someone's going to attack me? What are they going to do? Maliciously make it cold in the store? But the reality is the HVAC equipment was in the Target stores, on the Target networks. Those networks were shared with the point-of-sales terminals. By attacking the HVAC contractor, they were able to get access to that network. And that network gave them access to their final target, which was the point-of-sales terminals. And I dare say that this was not good for that HVAC contractor. I'm going to imagine Target was a little miffed at them for allowing this to come through the back door. So even if you're just a vendor, you're not the end target. It could still be devastating to you as a business to be the vehicle for this kind of attack. And then there's access to people. Do you know people who might be real targets? Are you friends with them? Are you family with them? Are you on social networks with them? Because you might not be the person they're trying to get to, but by getting to you, they may be able to get your social networks, information about your friend, enough to really form a good social engineering attack. If they can hack your computer, they can see all of your email chains. They can see how you talk to him, what you talk to that person about. Do you send her photos? Do you refer to her by her first name, by her last name? What kinds of deals are you discussing? And then they could use your computer to send a phishing attack to the target that is absolutely, perfect to the last detail in terms of tone, in terms of wording, in terms of address, in terms of source, right? It really is coming from your computer. That malware was sent from your desktop, from your computer, from your email address to your friend, and they clicked on it because it looked like the right person, and now they're toast. And finally, because the attackers aren't stupid, they're attacking companies with obviously weak defenses. Classic low-hanging fruit. There's no reason to try to get out a ladder and pluck that peach from the very top of the tree when you can walk by and there's one right there that's nice and ripe that you can just grab as you're going by. So the attackers are preferentially going after the easiest targets that provide access to what it is they want. Right? They've got some scam, some crime they want to commit. There might be a list of companies they could go after that would allow them to commit the crime that they're interested in. They're going to pick the easiest one first. So then, why is this more damaging? Well, there's several reasons why targeted attacks are inherently more damaging than untargeted attacks. First of all, they selected you as a weak target, probably. So the odds are throughout your networks, throughout your infrastructure, the architecture of your databases, you haven't done the right things to really secure it. So if you're a weak target, you're probably weak all the way down. It's going to hurt a lot. But also, the attacker knows what they're looking for. They've targeted the organization because they know what it is they want to do. So it's not like they just stumbled in and looked around and go, I wonder what's here. I wonder if I can do anything with what I found. No, they already know what they're looking for. They're looking for your credit cards. They're looking for your M&A. They're looking for some specific thing. They get to stay undetected longer because they're not making a lot of noise doing it. They didn't attack the 2,000 employees you've got. They attacked the 2 employees that they needed to get to the data they wanted. And they know what they're going to do with it. Right? They know, we're going to do a stock trading scam. We're going to sell the data to the government. Or we're going to humiliate you, and we already know kind of how we want to humiliate you. We've already got the Dropboxes set up. We're ready to dox you, and we have a plan for how we're going to leak the data out over the coming weeks and months. They've thought it through in advance, so once they've got the stuff they need, they can make maximum effect and use of the things they're stealing as soon as they get it. So what's the takeaway from all this? To me, the keys are phishing and malvertising are exploding trends. They've been big, they're getting bigger. They're primarily against the browser, and the browser will get breached. Browsers are Swiss cheese. There are so many exploits against them. We're seeing many hundreds of major patches against the browsers every year. That pace is not going down. So there's an endless font of exploits against browsers. No time soon are we going to see those stop working. The attackers are moving to targeting, and they're doing that because it's harder to catch them. And even when you do catch them, it usually takes much longer. And we've seen studies that say that breach investigation companies come in, and when they're rooting out an attacker, they find that most of them have been there for a couple hundred days, maybe 9 months, that they've been in the network and doing damage and gathering data. And that's pretty typical, especially with these targeted kind of attacks. They're able to stay there not minutes, not hours, not days, but months, sometimes years. And these targeted attacks are going to hurt more. If someone is sending out a mass spam with ransomware, Yeah, if you don't have proper backup schemas and you don't keep old copies, then you might lose some data on a few desktops, and that would be unfortunate. Whereas if someone's doing a targeted attack, they're going to be able to get in there and eat your lunch. You can get a Sony type damage from the targeted attacks rather than an inconvenience, which is what we generally see from the untargeted attacks. My advice for security, you can't focus on everything. If you're focusing on everything, you're focusing on nothing. I think in addition to the basic blocking and tackling that most of us are doing, it's really important to focus on the browser as a source of insecurity. And I think it's key to think about it in terms of preventing, containing, and minimizing the breaches, because you know that browsers are going to be vulnerable. There will always be new exploits. You're never going to be able to identify all the malware in advance. The 0 days and the new sophisticated attack methodologies are going to slip by your firewalls. They're going to avoid your anomaly detection. So what happens when there is a breach? And even if it's never detected, how can you design your networks and your infrastructure? Think about designing it to prevent damage when that attack happens, even if you don't know about it. And finally, if you can, prevent identification by websites. Avoid the targeting in the first place. If the website you're visiting doesn't know you're in the target demographic, doesn't know you're working at Facebook or Amazon or the Department of Defense, they may never launch the attack in the first place because you don't meet their demographics. And in fact, if you look like you're trying to hide your identity, you probably look like a security researcher, and that may make it even less likely for you to be attacked. You might not just be on their I want this guy list. You may in fact get on their don't attack this person under any circumstances list. And so that can be a very effective way of staying off the radar. Avoiding targeted email turns out to be much, much harder, because we want to communicate with people by email, right? We give out our email address. It's on our business cards. It's on the website. We provide lots and lots of ways for people to get in contact with us by email. If you're in a situation where it's an extremely high security environment and it's really important to avoid targeting, and you know you are extremely likely to be a target of sophisticated opponents, you might want to consider, if you have to use email at all, using email addresses that are not the name of the user and are not in any way associated either in the username or the domain with the organization you belong to. And if you're doing that, make sure you're taking a step back and paying attention to the other people in your organization who might be emailing you, making sure that that doesn't associate it and further cause problems. It's somewhat more exotic and difficult to implement, but implementing it against websites is not that hard if you've got the right tools. So not surprisingly, we've thought a lot about this. This is a set of threats that we've been concerned about now for years, and we built a tool called Passages, which is a virtualized web browser. And so what we're doing to try to address this set of threats we've talked about is we're putting a conventional browser, which is vulnerable, inside a virtual machine on your desktop, so that if you go to a bad website and the browser gets compromised, the exploit and the compromise is now sitting inside that virtual machine. And we isolate that from the desktop and from the network, so the attacker can't break out. They can't try to stick malware on your hard drive. They can't scan the rest of your network looking for a vulnerable printer or looking for your login servers or your LDAP or databases or what have you. It can't see any of that. All it can see is inside this VM and a VPN back out to the cloud. And we have that VPN there not just to isolate the network, but also because it hides your identity. So if someone's looking at your connection to their website, you don't look like who you are. You look like some random person on the internet, in no way associated with your organization. So that allows you to actually prevent those attacks, prevent the identification. And then at the end of every session, we burn the whole thing down. So whether or not there was any malware in there, we destroy it. So we're not depending on detection. So even if it's the slickest 0 day in the world, it's getting blown up as soon as you close the browser. So if that's of interest, let me know. My name's Lance Cottrell. I am Chief Scientist for Passages at Ntrepid, and I'd like to open it up to any questions. All right, I'm not seeing many questions come in, so if you do have any, please send them to me, or if you post them in this note before we close the webinar, we'll make sure to get back to you by email. I really appreciate your time and attention, and thanks so much for joining us. Actually, we're just suddenly, as soon as I say this, the questions start to come in. Any thoughts on exploits in Tor? Tor, the Onion router, is another anonymous browsing platform. It's a free tool. It's a sort of a volunteer effort. Anyone can set up nodes and run them. There are a number of exploits. Well, the Tor browser is not secure in and of itself. It's not running in a virtual machine, so it is vulnerable to exploits against the browser that the user's using, which would then allow drive-by downloads or malware to get through. They try to lock it down. But also from an anonymity point of view, because it's a volunteer network, there have been lots and lots of examples of people who have maliciously set up nodes in the Tor network to actually collect data and spy on users. And so I'm somewhat uncomfortable with their model. I think just for casual purposes, it's okay, but I would never do anything that you want to keep private just because the odds of it getting intercepted are too high. And there have been many documented cases of people using it to gather data, to insert malware, to spam, to capture email addresses, things like that. How do you protect your email? As an alternative to just the scanning, and of course we recommend the scanning, is if you access your email account through Passages or through a secure web browser platform, then the email, any exploits in that email can't directly get out to your computer and infect you. If you click on a link, then you're guaranteed to have it stay within that. And in fact, our recommended deployment for users is either to use the email inside the secure web browser or to set up our secure browser as the default web client so that when you click on a link in your email, it automatically opens up in the secure browser and ensures that you're protected. So you're never having it pop, your local Internet Explorer or Firefox or what have you, which would then leave you open to vulnerabilities. I hope that answered your question. So our software, someone asked, what is our software doing exactly? What Passages is it's, in fact, a Firefox browser. We're using a conventional browser and then wrapping it inside a virtual machine and running it on your local desktop, but then we've wrapped it in our own tools to make it look and feel like a normal browser. So actually, if you click on a link in your email, boom, a Firefox window pops up, and to the user, it will look like the Firefox is just running on their desktop. But actually, it's running inside a full virtual Linux machine on the desktop, so that it's not even the same operating system as your desktop. And the malware gets trapped in there. There is almost no malware written against Linux as a desktop as well, which is a nice thing because it's such a small fraction of the ecosystem. There's lots of attacks against malware as a server, but very few people using it as a desktop, so we just don't see much of that in the wild. If you encounter malware on the web, almost certainly going to be going against Windows. So even if they can compromise the browser, unlikely to be able to affect the Linux virtual machine. But then even if it can affect that, it can't get to your local desktop because we're not sharing files, we're not sharing file systems, there's no local mounts, we don't allow network traffic to the local network. So that keeps it very tightly restricted. If that didn't answer the question, please follow up. So someone's asking how to protect it with Outlook for email. So if you're using a local client, we can't, with Passages, protect you against malware in file attachments. So if you double-click an attachment in the Outlook, if you're using the desktop client, then that would still be a problem. But like I said, it's much easier to scan malware in attachments. So now what we're seeing is much more in the links that link you to a website that's going to push down malware. And that's where Passages protects you. So we're going to automatically, when you click that link, if Passages is your default browser, it gets opened in Passages, and then you're safe. And even if you then download a file, Passages prevents that from going directly to your desktop. We do provide a way for you to download files using something we call Safehold, which actually uploads it to our servers. We have a bunch of beyond signature-based tools that we're using to scan and test that software before the user can then manually initiate a transfer down to their desktop, which makes it impossible for drive-by downloads. There's no way to trick the user into downloading something. They actually have to go into a Passages window and request the given file to be transferred to their local desktop. That also provides a mechanism for uploading files into the Passages environment. Because we understand, obviously, people need to be able to upload and download files from time to time. But we don't want to allow that to be kind of the default all-the-time behavior, because realistically, most of the time you're just viewing content and entering things into web pages. And we don't want to allow that typical behavior to enable malware to get a foothold on the desktop. Someone was asking if it's possible to protect yourself from targeting with incognito mode in the browser. And most browsers have some form of private browsing or incognito setting that allows you to to make yourself, quote, anonymous. But actually all it's doing is turning off cookies and a couple of other simple tracking mechanisms. But in reality, the bad guys are using some very sophisticated targeting. The first thing that the incognito mode doesn't do is it doesn't hide your IP address. And if you're coming from your home or your office, that's going to be probably a long-term IP address that uniquely identifies you. And so you're going to get caught. Additionally, they're using things like super cookies, which bypass the standard cookie cleaning tools, and browser fingerprinting, which recognizes the unique pattern of plugins and fonts and everything else in your browser, which turns out to uniquely identify you on the internet. And advertisers are already actively using that to re-cookie you even after you delete cookies. So while incognito mode provides some protection, it's not actually all that effective. So I'm saying they're looking for services for individuals, companies, and websites, and they believe the current mode of informed users versus professionals is badly inadequate. So I think what you're talking about is security based on trying to train people, and I think that's absolutely spot on. That we see a lot of people trying to say, well, we will teach our users not to click bad links. We'll teach them what to look for in URLs, or to spot what a phishing email looks like, or not to click on the wrong thing. And beyond the fact that some of these attacks, like drive-by malvertising, the user never sees anything and can't be trained to do the right thing because it never interacts with them. Even so, there's a large fraction of people who either cannot or will not pay attention to that kind of thing, right? They either are not technical enough to really get it, or they can't be bothered to look because they feel like it's the security guy's problem. You know, it can't hurt to reduce the number of attacks that are successful by training your people, but it's never going to be the silver bullet because such a large fraction of users are simply untrainable. And so I completely agree with what I think your point is, that security has to be secure even against ignorant or intentionally stupid users, right? Even if they have, just blissfully clicking on every link under the sun, it should still be very difficult for them to do any harm to themselves. And that's really a core philosophy of our architecture. So if you browse from a virtual machine, how safe will you be, say, using a VMware machine? It really depends on the details of how you're doing it. So if you have, say, a local VM that you're spinning up each time and you run the browser in that, malware can infect that, certainly over time. So you'd need to manually then roll it back at the end of every session. You're probably running Windows inside that VM, which of course is one of the, is the most targeted operating system, so that inherently makes you somewhat more vulnerable. And then the question is that a VM that you're using just for your browser? In which case, that actually works okay. It's a lot of work. I think most users wouldn't do it, but for technical people, you can certainly set that up. But if you're doing the rest of your work in there as well, now you've just moved the point of vulnerability from your desktop to the VM. And if all your files and sensitive data and emails are in that VM, and the VM is persistent, then you're right back to where you started. So it's the same thing with VDI. If your company uses a VDI, it certainly helps with updates and patching and version control and central administration and monitoring. But if that VDI image gets compromised, it's able to get at everything else, all your data, just as it would on the desktop. So virtualization isn't a silver bullet unless you've optimized the virtualization for security and isolation. And so that's the key. And certainly, a sophisticated, sysadmin could set this up on their own, but it's not very user-friendly. Someone asks, can they use ad blockers to protect themselves from malvertising? And yes, it does help. Absolutely. It blocks a lot of those ads so you won't see them. We're now, of course, seeing the backlash from websites that they're blocking ad blockers. So you want to go in and you're running your ad blocker and you go to Forbes and Forbes says, hi, we notice you're running an ad blocker. Please turn it off or you can't come in. And there's a bit of an arms race going back and forth as people are trying to build ad blocker blockers that make it not visible. But what's sort of funny is that while Forbes had their most recent malvertising attack, they had just implemented their ad blocker, so they forced all of their users to turn off their ad blockers, which then immediately exposed them to the malvertising and got them all infected, which is sort of a cruel irony. Someone says, what about mail clients using SSL? SSL is fantastic protection against interception of your email. If you're worried about your ISP and you're at home, or if you're at Starbucks and you're on Wi-Fi and you're worried about someone stealing the email off the air, but it really does nothing to protect you against the content of the email. So even if the content is encrypted with SSL communicating with your servers, when you get the email and click on it, the fact that it was encrypted getting to you doesn't protect you. It doesn't protect you against any malware attachments or malicious links or anything else. Absolutely a good thing. Everyone should be using SSL for their email, but it doesn't protect against these kinds of attacks that we're talking about. Great question, and I forgot to mention this. Someone's asking, is it compatible with Mac? Yes, it is, absolutely. Passages is dual platform Windows and Macintosh. In fact, we're a heavily Mac shop, so providing Mac support was a very high priority for us. And we know that increasingly we're seeing companies that allow their employees to pick their own devices. And when people get to pick their own devices, a pretty high percentage pick Mac. So unlike most of the solutions we see out there that are Windows only, it really isn't good enough to protect 80% of your workforce, because suddenly all the attacker needs to do is go, oh, let me just target the Mac guys. We know in general there's less malware for Macs, but let's not get cocky. Macs are not absolutely secure. There are lots of Mac exploits, and the attackers are starting to realize that it's making up a significant fraction now of the population of computers they want to exploit. And that's a rapidly expanding area for those attackers. So yes, absolutely, Mac support is available. The physical attacks on computers. Physical attacks on computers is not a threat that we're trying to address. In general, we're not trying to protect against attacks that have already succeeded in attacking the desktop, because we're running inside the host operating system with our virtual machine. If someone has managed to compromise the host, either through some other attack mechanism or because they got physical access to the device, or compromised, put in some extra chip or flashed the firmware in some way, that's kind of out of the scope of what we can protect against. It's also a very small fraction of attacks, unless you're traveling internationally and you're worried about cyber espionage or nation-state level attacks against your devices. And in some countries, that's not at all uncommon. It doesn't scale, though, right? You're not going to have someone probably breaking into your mid-level sysadmin's house and hacking their computer and putting a hardware attack on it. It's an attack that, by its nature, is very high effort. And so in cases that warrant it, you do see this, but the vast majority of attacks that we see are still coming in over the wire. It's the phishing, it's the malvertising, it's watering holes, just because that's highly effective, much lower risk than trying to do physical intrusions, and gets the job done. Maybe when the other tools become effective enough that the only way to launch these attacks is with physical access, we'll see an upswing in that. But I think at that point we can all celebrate that we've done a really, really good job on our security. We're miles away from that. Is Passages compliant with ActiveX controls? Passages is running in a Linux environment, so we are compatible with anything that will run on Firefox on a Linux platform. So Java, JavaScript, Flash, HTML5, all of those things, streaming video, all kinds of content are fully supported. We're not locking down the content at all because you need to be able to access the websites, and the websites are serving you content in all sorts of formats. And if we try to provide security by preventing those tools from working, we just break a lot of the web. But it is running in Linux, so if it is a Windows-specific capability that you need, some particular ActiveX control, that would not probably run within Passages. We often find cases where we've got users who actually want to set up a whitelisted scenario for internal websites. So one of the deployment scenarios that comes up pretty often is someone will install Passages as the default browser in their network, but they've got some internal HR or finance system that they want to access separately. If they try to go to that link, Passages causes their local browser to pop up, and they get direct access to that. So that way you can access legacy systems, you can use old IE, and it even separates it out from your other browser. And then they can set up their firewall so that that browser isn't allowed to get out to the open internet. It's only allowed to access the internal resources, and Passages is the only way of getting to the public internet. And from a IT perspective, it's great, because all of the traffic now is going over one browser, it's going through the cloud, it's all being monitored. Our systems are able to capture all of the user activity for commercial installations and see exactly who went to what websites, when they did it, how often they log in. All kinds of audit trails get generated for the IT departments. We're planning this year on releasing a consumer version of Passages. Right now it's only for enterprise use. Obviously the consumer version won't have any of that tracking or data gathering because of our history in providing privacy, anonymity, and security tools to people. It's a foundational belief that we not be collecting data on our consumers, but our enterprise customers, they have to, often for compliance reasons, and so we've fully instrumented the tools for that. Someone says, so what makes Passages different from other protections? I mean, I think the incumbent protections are really firewalls, intrusion detection, anomaly detection, endpoint anti-malware. All of those have very different methodologies for providing protection. And we're not saying that you should stop using firewalls, but they're demonstrably ineffective against the attacks that are coming out these days. I mean, anti-malware does a great job of stopping malware that was initially deployed 3 months ago, but does a terrible job against the thing that's being deployed today. And the same is true of a lot of these systems. So we're now seeing kind of a paradigm shift to new kinds of security solutions out there that are more robust against unknown attacks, unanticipated scenarios, and don't require detection, don't require that you be able to spot the thing to still be safe. And that's our whole containment philosophy, that even if the malware penetrates the IE and gets onto the Linux, it's still trapped inside that. And as soon as you close your browser, we blow up the entire virtual machine, and next time you open the browser, we're actually recreating it from a known good copy on disk from scratch. So, we're not trying to just wipe things out and hope we manage to delete it everywhere. We're burning it to the ground and rebuilding, from foundation up. And that way we don't depend on any ability for us to know what's going on, right? We don't need to see the malware. We do detect malware, we do alert on it, we provide, feedback to the users, but that's not necessary for the protection. The protection works anyway. And I think that's a big difference to the way we're approaching things. You can see lots of information about Passages at getpassages.com. Or if you go to Ntrepidcorp.com, there's a link to the Passages section there, and you can see all the information about the Passages product. Right now, will it be available to the public? Right now, it's corporate only. We're committing that in 2016, we will be releasing a consumer version. We're not quite ready to give a hard date on that yet, but we're working very hard towards that. We know there's a lot of demand for this tool in the public sector. In fact, we've already got friends and family up and running it. I think almost everyone in the company has their parents, siblings, children, spouses all using passages personally, just because once you start using something like this, you start feeling uncomfortable if anyone around you isn't using it. Here's a good question. Someone's asking, how does passages work in a Windows virtual desktop world? So if you're running VDI, great point, because VMs don't like to live inside other VMs. What we're doing with VDI deployments is passages actually runs in its own VDI. And so when you click on it, it automatically spins up a new VDI image that displays into your primary VDI. So it's still running in its own separate sandbox. It's still destroyed in exactly the same way, but now both your desktop and the passages image are running on the VDI environment up in the cloud. So yeah, lots of our customers have had that requirement, and they play very well together and still provide that same level of protection, because your desktop VDI, it acts like your desktop, so it's still vulnerable. If it gets compromised, you're in trouble. The passages running in the separate hardened one that self-destructs, that gives you the security to be able to click links and not have it infect that primary VDI. All right, I think that's all the questions. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. I love it when we get interactive with these things. So thanks very much. And if you have any follow-up, please do contact us. You're more than welcome to reach out to me, send me email, direct message me on Twitter, and we've got a blog, podcast. We're always talking about these security issues, and love to see you on those forums as well. Thanks very much.